And I am so excited for today's presentation, which is all about biodiversity. And we have such a great speaker with us today. My name is Judy Browse, and I'm the Executive Director of the North American Association for Environmental Education. And we're so excited to have Dr. Eric Dinerstein here, who is the Director of WildTech and the Biodiversity and Wildlife Solutions Program at Resolve. And I've known Eric for years, and we couldn't be luckier to have him on board. I also want to thank all our affiliate co-hosts, and I'll tell you more about Eric in a minute. We partner with all our affiliates across the country to sponsor these webinars and hope that we can bring new ideas and thinking to the field. We have webinars every month on a variety of different topics. Many of you have joined us before, trying to showcase leaders working in EE, trying to talk with people from other related disciplines, and really just improve our practice. And we have our next webinar on September 28th, Go Far, Walk Together, all about community engagement as transformative practice, working with the Center for Whole Community. What we're going to do today, as usual, is a quick intro on how to use the chat function, and then I will introduce Eric, and most of this is all going to be about Eric. So for those of you who have not used Zoom, the best way to let us know what you're thinking or asking questions throughout the presentation is hitting the chat box. If you don't see it automatically, there's a little thing that has 3 dots and says more. Hit on that and you'll see the chat. It'll come up and you can send a message to everyone, or you can send a message privately to different individuals. So please feel free to use the chat box and let us know what you're thinking. And Eric will probably stop here and there to ask for questions. And if you have any technical problems, please feel free to email Kristen or Sai, who are both online and fantastic. Kristen has been the mastermind of the webinar series, and Sai is our social media and communications expert, and together couldn't have a better team there. So the highlight of our afternoon here is Eric Dinerstein, and let me tell you a little bit about Eric. His bio is about 87 pages, but I've cut it down a little bit because he's done so much in his lifetime. He is the Director of Biodiversity and Wildlife Solutions Programs at Resolve, which he created to help focus on saving endangered large mammals from extinction and saving tropical rainforests. His program includes an initiative called WildTech, and the web address is on the slide. And WebTech is trying to bring innovations and technology to help save endangered species and their habitats through field tech and the website. He has also been a leader in the Nature Needs Half Network, which started as an idea informed by science that nature needs sufficient space in order to function properly for the benefit of all life on our planet. Since 2009, this idea has transformed into an international movement of scientists and conservation leaders who recognize the urgent necessity of keeping at least half the planet wild and intact. And you can check out Eric's article in Bioscience in April 2017 to find out more, as well as his essay on a new global deal for nature paired with the Paris climate deal. From 1990 to 2014, Eric was the chief scientist at the World Wildlife Fund, which is where I was fortunate to work with him. Beginning in 1975, he conducted studies of tigers and their prey and led conservation programs for large mammals such as greater one-horned rhinoceros. Along with Dr. David Olson, he is the co-architect of the Global 200 terrestrial ecoregions of the world, which was groundbreaking work and is in conservation. He also helped map tiger conservation landscapes, designed the Terai Arc landscape in Nepal and India, and came up with the idea of a global tiger summit staged in November 2010 to double the wild tiger population. Eric is also a senior fellow at the World Resources Institute and has worked closely with the Global Forest Watch team to create Global Forest Watch Biodiversity, which he'll tell you more about. He's also established the Quick Response Biodiversity Fund, an innovative funding mechanism to address urgent land purchases for endangered species in developing countries. He has been all over the world and is one of the best international naturalists and national naturalists I've ever met. He can identify everything and he knows the backstory. He's also published widely on biodiversity, ecoregions, and large mammal biology, including several co-authored books on conservation assessments of ecoregions. And here are some of the books he's written, the monograph on rhinos. You can look at Tigerland, the Kingdom of the Rarities. And then he's also published a number of books, or he's in the process of publishing a number of books for young adults, including the first one, What Elephants Know. And he just found out that he's the winner of the South Asian Book of the Year, which is very, very exciting. So let's give Eric a warm virtual applause. And Eric, if you want to take over the screen, we're so happy to have you on board.
Well, thank you, Judy. And I'm about to... Okay. Can you see me? At least see my first slide of Nature Needs Half.
Yes, I can see it. Hopefully everybody else can.
If they can't, they can send me a chat message. So, well, it's a pleasure to, I guess, virtually be here. I haven't done one of these before. I've always been in front of a live audience right in front of me, so this will be exciting and different. I'm thrilled to be here because it'll be the opportunity to reach people who are very sensitive to the plight of our planet. I don't think one has to be even an environmental educator, although it certainly helps to understand the depth of the deep planetary emergency that we find ourselves in. Between the 6th extinction crisis in the history of our planet and climate change, we face two of the most severe problems in really the history of life on Earth. And we have figured out that there is, as dire as this emergency is, that there is a way forward that we could possibly bring all these systems back into line and save 100% or close to it of all the world's species and habitats through saving half of the Earth and the marine, both terrestrial and marine, for the rest of life. And so this is what the first 2/3 of my talk will be about. And then the last third will be about how we can use these exciting new technologies to map, monitor, and better protect life on Earth.
And Eric, this is Judy for a minute. It's a little garbled. I wonder if you can either get closer to the mic a little.
Okay. Now, is this better?
Oh, much better. Thank you.
Sorry, I moved too far away. Okay, so hopefully this slide is self-explanatory for those who couldn't follow closely. We're trying to save half of life on Earth, so let's get right to it. Okay. For some reason.
Click on the screen. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, so this is a map in front of you that you won't recognize perhaps right away because there's no political boundaries on it. And it's, in a way, it's a map of what nature would look like if nature could draw the boundaries itself. Here you have the world depicted as 846 ecoregions. Ecoregions are essentially ecosystems of regional extent, and the colors tend to follow the types of habitats that you might imagine. So like dark greens are tropical rainforests, the hot yellows and oranges are deserts, the purplish colors are tundra, and so on. And so this is a way of describing really what the Earth might have looked like, say, 14,000 years ago, before humans had really had much effect on the vegetation. So it gives us a benchmark of what nature used to be like. And you can read more about this at this website that we'll actually be going on in a moment to look at. This paper, the first version of this was published in 2001, called Terrestrial Ecoregions of the World. And just this past year, we updated after a 2-year study to create the most up-to-date map ever of biogeographic information. And over the course of these last 17 years, this has become, the first paper had become the most widely cited in the history of the journal Bioscience, over 3,500 times, used by everybody from people who are wanting to do conservation planning because these units make a lot of sense for that, to climate change modelers, to people who might, to biologists who might want to map the distribution of beetles. So this is the underpinning base map of where we'll go. Now, this idea of protecting half, it sounds a little preposterous, but it's actually been rooted in science for some time. And there seems to be a consistent answer from scientists when asked, how much would it really take to protect life on Earth? And the answer keeps coming back, about half. Here's a map that one of our colleagues, Reed Noss, created for the state of Florida. Perhaps there are some educators from Florida here who'd be familiar with this map, of showing what it would look like to protect the core reserves of Florida for large wandering creatures like black bears or Florida panthers, and then connect these areas to allow dispersal of those species, as well as places of areas where you have species with very narrow ranges. The map of Florida actually looks not that much different today, and the state has gone a long ways to protecting a lot of these areas and establishing corridors. And then through a series of other papers where there's been systematic reviews of what's needed in different ecoregions to conserve what's there, the answer keeps coming back to about half. And so that's how we settled on trying to achieve this percentage. Later, last year, the scholar and the high priest of biodiversity, so to speak, E.O. Wilson, came out with his book, Half Earth, that took this a step further and formalized it. And what I'm about to talk about today is really the scientific underpinnings of Half Earth, or Nature Needs Half, and how to get there. So we have to ask three basic questions. First of all, what's necessary to preserve biodiversity, ecosystems, and climate functions? Second, is this crazy? Is the aspirational goal of protecting half the Earth possible in the terrestrial realm? And then perhaps most important from a strategic point of view, which half should be protected and how much is already protected? So let's go to now a website that I want to call your attention to, that you can use in your classes on your own to learn more about where you lived and where you might want to travel next. So if we click on this and we go to a website that accompanies the paper that Judy mentioned was published in April of 2017, some of our co-authors from Google produced this map for us. And what we're going to do is look at this new map of life on Earth, and we're going to try to bring out a couple of features. First of all, you see the 846 ecoregions. These can be nested in what we call biomes, which are essentially large areas that share a similar environment and similar vegetation. And let's simplify this map by just clicking on the 14 biomes of the terrestrial realm, and you can see everything from here on this key, from boreal forests in blue and tundra in light blue, to tropical subtropical grasslands, savannahs, and shrublands in orange, and Mediterranean forests, woodlands, and shrub in bright crimson, and mangroves in magenta to help them stand out. Now you can zoom in. We'll go back to ecoregions, and since I'm here in Washington, D.C., we'll just move over here and zoom in a little bit. And we can see where we're located here in Washington, that we're in we border a couple of ecoregions. And what you can do is look at your own ecoregion after this talk, and as you move the mouse over different ecoregions, their names pop up, or you can click on that ecoregion and you'll get a description a bit more about that. And soon, in the next few months, you'll get full descriptions of these as well. So this is a site to keep coming back to, because in our collaboration with Google, it will keep becoming more enriched. What I want to show you, though, and to go back to our theme of Nature Needs Half, so let's zoom back out, we want to ask the question right now, how much of the world is actually protected? Well, we know that about 15% of the terrestrial realm is now under formal conservation. However, what we can do is to ask this question and to say, what do we need to protect half, and how far along are we? And the answer is, before we even get started with this campaign, we're actually pretty far along. If you look at these green polygons, the dark green that are here, some that are shown here, is that we are 98 of the 846 ecoregions, or basically 12% are already 50% protected. So let's go to our key here. So more than 50% half protected is a dark green, and we have, as I said, 98 of these ecoregions. So we have 98 success stories where the countries that house these ecoregions have figured out ways to set aside at least half. Now, the other exciting part is in doing this analysis, we found that another about 350 ecoregions are in this lighter green color, meaning that if they simply change the land use designation from certain categories to protected, they could reach half as well. The ones that are shown in the orange color are about 110 ecoregions that would require some level of restoration to get to half, but even here it's still possible. The ones that are in bright red are about 202 ecoregions that are never going to reach half, that are, you can see like in the United States, for example, this is mostly the corn and soybean belt, parts of the southeast, that even with extensive restoration, many of these areas are too important for global agriculture ever to reach 50% again. However, what we want to do here is to protect the last remaining parts and to restore as much as we can. So the good news is that to try to get to half, in about 75 to 80% of the ecoregions, it's still possible. You can learn more about this study if we go to About here and you see the report on the download report. You click on that and you can get the scientific paper that this is all based on. So this is a really a fundamental insight into the future of the planet, that even though we hear it talk about the Anthropocene and how the world is changing so rapidly in the age of domination of man, of humankind, that it's still possible to not only protect half, but then in so doing to address the climate crisis as well. So you can read more about that in the attached publication on the website. So let's go back to our PowerPoint slideshow here, and I hope all of you take the time to visit that.
And Eric, we'll send that out again so that everybody can see it. And again, stay close to the mic if you could.
Okay, sure. And so two of the good news stories are in rainforest and in the tundra. In the rainforest, we found that 101 of the 233 ecoregions, or about 44%, are already half protected or could reach half. This is critical because perhaps more than 50% of the world's species are crammed into about 7% of the land area, which is tropical rainforest. At the other extreme, in terms of temperature, we have species that range over large areas like caribou, and in the 51 tundra biomes, more than half of those are already half protected. So our job is to improve that in the other 12 biomes as well to keep pace. Now, let's zoom in on a couple of success stories of countries that have already reached this goal of half protected, or are well on their way, or have innovations. And let's move out of the developed world, and we're going to go into the developing world, because I'm going to try to make 3 points. First is that you don't have to be a wealthy country to try to reach half protected, and the 3 examples I'll give are some of the poorest countries on Earth. Second is it doesn't just happen in remote areas, it can happen in densely populated countries as well. So let's start with Namibia, one of the most beautiful countries on Earth, and home to one of the largest populations of elephants in Africa. Here, these are quote-unquote desert elephants in the Northwest. Namibia is fascinating. So in the 3 slides I'm going to show you, the key is that the polygons that are outlined in magenta, such as the one shown here, number 13, those are protected areas. And then the polygons that are shown in the red outline, in this case of Namibia, these are called communal conservancies. These are areas that are under the ownership or the management of local communities who own the wildlife on the land, but not the land itself. And what's happened over the course of the last 20 years in Namibia, since its independence in 1993, is this proliferation of community conservancies where local communities have reaped substantial economic benefits from bringing back the wildlife and the habitats that are found there. So that now communal conservancies are essentially the stepping stones, the connections between the national parks. And it's estimated that in a few years, about 50% of the country, or 50, will be under conservation management, either national parks directly or communal conservancies. And much of the development of the country actually funnels through these conservancies. So Namibia being one of the most poorest countries on earth, this is very impressive. Now people will say, okay, there's only a couple of million people in Namibia. Could this work in a more populous country? So we'll go to Nepal, where I've worked for many years. This is the Terai Arc. This is we're at 600 feet elevation here, looking at Mount Annapurna at 26,000 feet. So the highest density or the shortest distance between lowlands and uplands anywhere in the world. Again, the map, the purple areas are the protected areas, and the red areas are landscapes of which connectivity between the reserves is being planned out and mapped. Nepal has about 22% of its land area protected. You can see that some of the large ones in the Himalayas, again, are these community conservation areas. So we're not saying that everything has to be national parks and reserves. They can be managed by communities just as well. And here we have, in the lowlands, where this picture was taken, we have one of the highest rural population densities on Earth. So people crammed into this lowland area, but it's possible because the soils are so fertile at the base of the Himalayas that we're able to have high production rice agriculture and a high density of tigers and rhinos and elephants as well. So you can protect half in places with high population density as well, as long as it's zoned properly. The last example is in Bhutan, which has taken a different course. In Namibia and Nepal, we had the example of communities leading the way to enhance conservation of land through local participation. That's somewhat true in Bhutan, but here's a case where the connectivity between reserves and the national parks themselves and the amount of forest cover are actually written into the country's constitution. So by constitutional law, Bhutan must maintain at least 60% of the country under forest. The actual total today is 72%, so they're doing much better. Here again, you can see the purple areas are the protected areas that are already established, and the red polygons are the corridors connecting them. Bhutan is one of the poorest countries on earth as well. And so one more example of countries that have shown that this is possible independent of your gross domestic product. Now, there are some ecoregions where we need to conserve much more than half, in particular the Brazilian Amazon, in Indonesia, probably in the Congo Basin, where we're concerned about biospheric function. So we know from scientific studies that unless we maintain about 80% of the whole Amazon basin under contiguous forest cover, the Amazon as a weather machine for the planet will stop functioning properly. It doesn't all have to be under national park and reserves, but the continuous forest canopy has to be maintained. So this factors into what we're doing. Now, this sounds, again, like an incredible challenge. How can we possibly think about 50% under protection with the population of the Earth supposedly getting to 9 billion, possibly peaking at 10 billion? Well, now some people say if you took the 7 billion people that are alive today on the planet and they could live at densities of, say, South Korea, then all the world's population could fit into a state the size of Colorado. Now, that's not going to happen, but that gives you some perspective that if we move to higher population densities, which is actually something that's happening already, that by 2050, it's assumed that 70% of the world will live in cities, that the shift to cities, the intensification of agriculture, a number of technological innovations in agriculture, in energy, in infrastructure, and cheaper sources of energy make this possible, where we could have what's called a great decoupling, where the growth of economies is not dependent upon exploiting natural resources more and more, but actually shrinking the human footprint and sparing land in the process. However, we need to make this a much more active policy rather than a byproduct of decoupling, where we stop using so much of nature so that we can also plan for its recovery. And there are a number of really interesting studies coming out now, and groups like the Breakthrough Institute that have launched this idea of the great decoupling that are really worth pursuing to everybody listening today. I won't go into that much here, but just to recommend some of the articles from the Breakthrough Institute that point the way of innovations in all of these areas. Another aspect that I talk about in the paper is the idea that we need, just like we have the Paris climate deal, we need a companion deal, a global deal for nature, because without a global deal for nature, the Paris climate deal can't succeed. The two are intertwined. And there are a number of ways that I won't go into here, but just to say that we can't reach a stable climate unless we protect all the world's rainforests and allow them to regrow. They're the cheapest, most vital thing we can do to absorb a lot more CO2 from the atmosphere. There are other examples as well of preserving coral reefs and reducing the acidification in the ocean as one more sink for carbon. So the two are intimately linked, but we argue that that nature needs its own deal as well. And that deal could include nature needs half as one of the underpinnings of the foundational layers, a commitment to supporting indigenous communities. It's estimated that as much as 65% of the world's surface are, at least on paper, under the authority of indigenous communities. However, only a fraction of that is actually realized. Another important part is saving the megafauna, because the large mammals of Earth are disappearing rapidly, and we need to save these source populations, and I'll mention this in the last part of my talk. And then technological innovations. So just as a way of summarizing this, we're not saying that protecting half the world is possible in 2017 or even 2020. This is a vision by 2050. And so imagine this is what the world looks like today in 2017 in terms of what's half protected, what could reach half, where it could recover with restoration, and where will not get there, but we have to protect the critical habitats in these nature imperiled ecoregions in the legend. So we'll contrast this picture with the next one, which is what it might look like in 2050 if we succeeded. And you see how much of the dark green spreads over much of the Earth, as well as the light green. The orange disappears, and we're just left with the nature imperiled areas, which should still be much better protected than before. So that's the vision of where we want to get to in 30 years. I'd now like to just switch quickly to how we could use new technologies to map, monitor, and protect life on Earth. And this is a project, some of which I'm involved in with the Leonardo DiCaprio Foundation. You'll hear much more about in the coming year. One of our close colleagues in this effort is Dr. Greg Astner from Stanford University and the Carnegie Airborne Observatory, who I consider to be the greatest ecologist working today. But first I'll say too, is with new technologies that are available, our ability to monitor life on Earth, particularly forests, is developing rapidly. For example, Global Forest Watch, a group that I work with, has come up with a new mapping tool powered by Google that enables anybody to look at the status of the Earth's forest anywhere in the world without having to be a remote sensing specialist. All you have to do is to be able to use a mouse, and I'm sure some of you have taken advantage of this website before, but if not, it's one worth looking into, is that each year a new update of the world's forest is provided at 30 meters resolution, and it's very interactive. You can look at how the forest cover has changed. You can see the scroll bar underneath that's animated. A very, very useful tool. So, but this useful tool was impossible as little as 5 years ago until cloud computing, until massive data storage, and the ability to, with cloud computing, to do the computations that are essential. It would have taken a single computer to do a forest change cover analysis for the whole globe one computer about 100 years to accomplish that task. 33,000 processors spinning in parallel can do this in under 3 days. So we're into this whole new world now of big data and the ability to apply it to conservation. And we'll be doing that with these new projects. One of them that I want to show you is work we're doing with Greg Astner to zoom in from that global map of biodiversity into regions and bioregions to improve conservation planning. And this is a map of Peru that he's created showing the different plant communities using a novel technique that really has just been developed in the last 10 years. It's based on those of you who are science teachers or suffered through high school chemistry like I did years ago will remember your spectrometer that you ran objects through, or minerals or compounds, and it broke down and told you what the constituents were. Well, to the right is a much more sophisticated version that sits on Greg's airplane that measures the reflectance of light off the leaf surface of tropical forest canopies. And because he has a reference collection of what the chemical constituents are of those leaf tissues, he can calibrate that and tell you what species the plane is flying over, which is boggling to think about. And so here's an example of that, where this work first got started on the island of Hawaii. Now, those who have worked in tropical forests know that one of the common features is that the leaves of trees all look alike. So here are two different species of trees, but you couldn't tell that apart so easily from the leaf morphology, and there's strong evolutionary selection pressure to make them look similar. But if you break down the chemical constituents, you can see that these two species are quite different. So the color bands to the right are showing the flora of the tropical forests of Hawaii and how different each one looks. It's almost like each one has its own chemical signature. So now you grasp the science, or the approach, what we call spectronomics. Now we're going to apply that to a much more complicated forest. So this is an image from a forest in Amazonian Peru, perhaps the most diverse piece of real estate on the entire globe, in Madre de Dios. And this is using an airborne laser that fires laser beams down to the surface of the ground and measures the echo. And in so doing, I'm greatly oversimplifying this, enables you to estimate the biomass of the forest. And so what we see here is that the colors, the redder the tree, the taller it is, the more biomass it contains in that forest, the more living tissue. And then the darker the color, the blues and the greens, the less amount of biomass. So that's giving us new insights into the forest about how carbon is stored and levels of biomass. But now, using a different sensor, Greg has flown over that, and because he and his team have climbed the trees and gotten samples from those leaf tissues, run them through a spectrometer, and then calibrated them, we can now identify the same forest to individual species. So each color represents a different species of canopy tree. Now imagine being able to do this for the whole globe. One of the things that Greg is trying to do is to put this spectrometer in orbit such that we'd be able to identify to a very high resolution canopy species in every habitat on Earth. So this is a rainforest, but imagine if you're in California's chaparral. Chaparral is the tallest vegetation out there. As long as it's the canopy species, or in a grassland, as long as you had the tissue in a reference collection, when a spectrometer flies over it, it could match up to the collection and tell you what species are there. Here's a place in California. This is Sequoia Kings Canyon. This is what it looks like in terms of here's the forest, and here it is color-coded to species. So this is breathtaking. I know you can't ooh and ah, I can't hear you, but this has never been seen before. Now we're going to be applying this to a new approach to conserving life. Why it says Google Earth is an ecological lie by omission is, if you look at a Google Earth map, all of the Amazon, and let's just look on the Peruvian side, looks, which is the yellow outline, looks green. And it's not all green. In fact, it's differently colored. And that's what it looks like according to 37 different plant communities that Greg has identified by combining some of the features of the individual plant identifications into this larger clustering, and shows how what is all solid green isn't solid green and uniform after all. It's these different communities. And so what we have here is an overlay, and this is one of the most important conservation maps I've ever seen, of the current protected area network or indigenous reserves that are outlined in the white polygons to look at, to create what's called a gap analysis, to identify where in Amazonian and Andean Peru are there unique plant communities that are not represented in the protected area system. And this is what we'll be doing in 6 different pilots under a project with the DiCaprio Foundation starting in the next year. So this is really groundbreaking science.
So Eric,
yes.
Can I stop you for a second and ask you a couple of questions?
Sure.
Somebody wanted to know, are any of these approaches being done in Canada? And that was Samantha. And Lauren wanted to know if those spectroscopy images are available on the website to use in education examples, if people can use those either in the classroom or non-formal education.
Second question first. Yes, if you go to Greg's website, the Carnegie Airborne Observatory for the Carnegie Institute of Science, all of this is on the web, and you can download these images and look at them. And this paper that I'm showing right here only came out in February of 2017, so this is all very recent. Everything you're seeing here, it's not even close to being in the textbooks. This is really cutting edge science. And the first question about Canada, not yet. A lot of LIDAR work, the other work that Greg does, has been done in Canada, but spectronomics has not. In Canada, it might not be as vital, because certainly when you get up into the boreal forests of Canada, a lot of the species are either black spruce or white spruce, and so you don't have that hyperdiversity that you see. So I'll point with my clicker down here into southeastern Peru. You have the highest diversity of tree species in the world here, or in the Napo of Ecuador up here, where you can have over 200 species of individual species of trees per hectare. If you were in parts of Canada, that would be a couple of species per hectare. So it's critical for us to get this mapping done in the places we have the highest diversity. The other thing that's really essential that Greg's work gives us an insight to is the 30 years that we've been doing conservation planning, we've lacked the 2 most important data layers, that of plants and invertebrates, which make up the bulk of biodiversity. It's simply impossible to get this level of information across large areas like Greg has been able to do using his airborne observatory. Because so most species on Earth are invertebrates, and because the life histories of invertebrates are tied to their host plants, if we can get the distribution of the host plants, then it's a wonderful proxy for invertebrates, which will probably never measure easily until perhaps new environmental DNA techniques are developed over the next few years. But I won't get into that here. So I'm going to end quickly now and just go on to a couple of other things we're doing. So Greg's, let's keep our fingers crossed that in the next couple of years he can get this sensor up on a satellite and we could circle the Earth with this. And incidentally, he's doing some amazing things right now, flying with his spectrometer over coral reefs in Hawaii, where it's now possible, it looks like, to detect the chemical signature or the reflectance of living, bleached, and dead corals, which would be immensely useful if we can put this in space and monitor coral reefs with climate change. And it may be even possible in the near future in the shallower reef systems to get the spectral signatures of coral species and actually census corals too, probably from a plane. Okay, so that still gives us what the Earth looks like from above. We know from our research in a lot of tropical forests where there's been heavy poaching that these could be what we call empty forests, that the forests no longer have the wildlife intact. They've been poached out or heavily decimated. And so we need ground sensors that can tell us a lot more about what's going on and how to better protect the precious wildlife that's there, in particular the endangered megafauna that I mentioned earlier. So we're pioneering a new technology we call TrailGuard, which is pictured on the far right here, a tiny cryptic camera. It doesn't look that cryptic here, but you'll see how cryptic it is in a second, that can take pictures of poachers before they kill. We're deploying these right now as I speak in the Masai Mara Game Reserve, and then starting tomorrow in the Grumeti Reserve on the border of Serengeti National Park in Tanzania. And this is the device, it's called TrailGuard. You can see the size of it next to a big pen. And what's advantageous here is that it's cryptic. It allows it to be hidden and connected to a computer that's in the ground. It's essentially real-time alerting because it's connected to either a GSM system or a new kind of communications technology called long-range radio frequency to send images of poachers to ranger stations. And it can have documented evidence that poachers are coming down the trail so that rangers can intercede and stop the poachers before they kill. Okay, so now I'm going to ask you to try and find the TrailGuard in this image. It's hidden here. I'll give you the hint that we put liquid contact cement on the side of the camera head and then roll it in dried elephant dung, which is our secret, to camouflage it, and then we stick it somewhere. So I guess you can't answer. This is the advantage of having a live audience. Is I often ask, okay, how many of you think it's hidden, the TrailGuard, in this little black spot here? How many of you think that it's hidden in this crevice here? How many of you think it's hidden in this crevice here?
Anybody want to write something in the chat box if you see it?
Well, I'll save you the trouble because this is a trick question. The answer is none of the above. It's actually right there. And we've had trackers, bush pilots, everybody walk past these and they never find them. So trust me, Kenya Wildlife Service game rangers, I think we've found a device, built a device that can really work. So here's some images now of poachers or people, intruders, walking down a trail in Tsavo National Park in a place they shouldn't be after dark, a number of kilometers in the park. And this was sent using a technique called long-range radio frequency because there's no cell coverage in this area. And in fact, in about 90% of the national parks in developing countries where we have a poaching problem, there is no cell coverage. So we have to find a different technology to be able to get these images out to ranger stations. And we now have developed that. The other critical thing is that while we're focused on poaching of elephants and rhinos, in actuality, most poachers, most animals are killed by setting snares. This is insidious, and they die horrible deaths. It's the most cruel thing imaginable. And so one of the uses of TrailGuard is when rangers go out on desnaring missions and patrols, they pick up the snares and in its place put a TrailGuard and then catch the pictures of the poachers and they come back to check their traps, which are no longer there. It can also be used in a lot of parks that are very large, like in Africa, where there are open access points into the park and no guards, no checkpoints monitoring them. The TrailGuard functions as a checkpoint. And so here they are taking pictures of people coming in on bicycles, on motorcycles, and getting the license plates of vehicles. So a very handy tool. And now we're working with a major tech company to produce version 3 that's going to go beyond. It's really, we call it TrailGuard artificial intelligence, because we're going to be using new computer vision chips similar to what's in self-driving cars that have onboard processing to monitor, to filter out the pictures of people or poachers, and then for specific wildlife species, and send those over this long-range radio frequency to the rangers or researchers, as the case may be. So we're into this whole new world of a revolution, really, in how we monitor things on the ground that will be operational in the next 2 years. So that's really the end of my talk. How this all fits together is we want to have this seamless system. We want to be able to protect half of nature, all of nature through accrediting half of the terrestrial and marine realms. And we want to do a much better job of monitoring and measuring what's there to make sure that we continue to fulfill this very ambitious goal. We're not trying to do it tomorrow. It's a 30-year vision. We have what's called the Nature Needs Half Network, which you can learn about by going to natureneedshalf.org and find out more about what we're trying to do. But I hope that this presentation has given you some sense of the work of some of the world's leading biologists that we're collaborating with and conservationists to really try and save life on Earth. I'll stop there.
Eric, thank you so much. Why don't you, let's see here if I can take back control.
Okay.
Give me one second here.
You
We had two additional questions. One is, let me just see here if I can do this. One was, you had used a term, I think you were talking about Namibia, about the term for the ownership, communal ownership. What was that term again?
The term was communal conservancies, which is what the term they use in Namibia and in other countries in Southern Africa, where it comes in different ways in different countries with their laws. But in Namibia, it means that the communities there, the ethnic groups, the native peoples of Namibia, can own the wildlife on their land, but the government still controls the land. But by owning the wildlife, they can set quotas. They can better protect it and develop the ecotourism programs that are now proliferating across Namibia and bringing a lot of income to local communities.
So Eric, another question was dealing with how to keep up on the latest science in biodiversity and integrate that into education programs for young people as well as adults, because many adults don't know about what you just shared with us.
Right. I would say the single best source, and I would just put this in your browsers to get to look at every day, is mongabay.com, which is a website. It's the leading environmental website run by a fellow named Rhett Butler, a very charismatic name and a very charismatic individual, who about 10 years ago decided that the environmental news wasn't being covered, and so he created this website to do that, and now it's by far the most popular and useful. And there's a whole section on technology that we actually help produce that is available. There's 180 articles online right now on Mongabay that deal with some of them deal with some of the technologies I've talked about. And it's the best place for news of really everything that I've covered today. You'll find a lot more information.
That's great. How did the name Mongabay come up? Do you know?
Cryptic. Mongabay is the name of an island off the coast of Madagascar. And Rhett, when he was a youngster, traveled to Madagascar with his parents. I think one of his parents was a geography professor and the other was a travel agent. So an interesting combination. And instead of going to the typical places kids went to, his parents took young Rhett on really exciting adventures around the world. And I think he had his epiphany when he was in Madagascar, a place that's close to his heart, and realized how fast that island was going in its unique biota. And so he took the name Mongabay for the site. Okay,
another question. What is your favorite charismatic megafauna, given that you've studied so many?
It has to be tigers, I guess, because I devoted a lot of my life to their conservation, and they're so impressive. When you see one in the wild, it's like nothing else.
Okay, Kristen, any other comments, or Sai, any other questions?
I don't see any questions.
Can we open it up? Can we see if we won't get too much muting? If some people want to directly ask a question, that would be great. Can you try that? And we haven't done this before, Eric, so it might be a nightmare, but let's try it.
I would have to promote individuals, but if any individual wants to be promoted, I'm happy to do that. Just give me a nod in the chat box. I'll ask a question. When thinking about charismatic megafauna, specifically you mentioned tigers, one of the things that comes up a lot, at least from my understanding, in Africa and other in Asia and other countries where there are large, potentially dangerous animals. How do you navigate human-wildlife conflicts in your conservation messaging?
That's a great question. We spend probably half of our time focused on human-wildlife conflict. And in many ways, human-wildlife conflict is the end result, in a lot of cases, of actually successful wildlife conservation. It's on a spectrum, it's the opposite end of doing really good endangered species conservation. Is in some cases, the endangered species, like tigers and elephants, come back and start becoming problems, or polar bears. I'll give a couple of instances. One of the biggest problems in Africa and Asia are elephants raiding crops. If you go to the Resolve website, you can watch a PBS NewsHour special on our use of cheap hobby drones to drive elephants out of croplands. And you'll see this amazing video. We've done 150 missions now, more than that, where we use cheap drones piloted by rangers that scare the elephants in a humane way and gently usher them out of fields and back into the national parks. We also use what's called chili fences. Elephants hate the smell of chili powder, and we make fences that are smeared with a concoction of hot chili oil, and that repels them from crops. More sophisticated are technologies we're using now. We're developing this new one called Lion Shield that right now requires capturing and collaring problem animals, in this case problem lions that are raiding livestock corrals of poor herders. When the $40 collar the lion is wearing has a chip in it, an RFID chip, a radio frequency, that sends a message to a base station when the lion gets too close. And when it gets within a certain distance, if the lion doesn't back away and is heading towards the livestock, it sends off deterrents like alarms, sirens, flashing lights, smoke bombs to scare the lion away.
Yeah.
Now we're doing this as well. We're going to put them on wolves and grizzlies in the U.S. and possibly polar bears in northern parts where they come into villages. And this way, it keeps the animals alive and keeps them out of trouble. We're hoping to skip the step of having to capture and collar them by combining the trail guard next year with Lion Shield, where instead of having to capture the animals, cameras set up in the area of conflict would take images of elephants or polar bears or grizzlies, and once it recognizes that as that animal, that species, it then sends the alert to the base stations.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so that's for next year. We're not there yet, but we're getting there.
Okay, one last question, and then we'll wrap this up. Samantha asked any recommendations you have for people pursuing an education in conservation or environmental stewardship who are just starting out and trying to establish a career.
Sure. Try to find a mentor, and also travel as much as you can. There's no substitute for seeing as many different environments and habitats as you possibly can, because it gives you insights that people who don't get around the world as much don't have. So any opportunity to work and live overseas, and for those interested in international conservation, is vital.
Thanks, Eric. Oh my gosh, so great. And this will be recorded, but any closing words for the group before we wrap it up? But boy, that was so amazing. And I follow your career.
Well, thanks. I appreciate everybody listening, and I hope you really follow what's going to be coming out of the Nature Needs Half website, and then eventually keep your eyes peeled on the DiCaprio Foundation. Go to their newsletter, which you can read about the Ecoregions on the latest one. They're doing the most exciting work in conservation right now. They're the most innovative group. We're working closely with them. And I think we're on the, I'd like to leave people with a really hopeful perception that as bleak as these times see right now, I think we're at a real turning point where we have the science, we know what we have to do, and I think we're starting to build a global movement that will get us to our goal within 30 years. I think that there's a lot of cause for optimism, and I think that sides that used to be warring or opposed to each other of development and conservation, once we see this great decoupling emerging and innovations, is that it really will be possible to live on Earth with a much larger population than we have now, with a much smaller footprint, and leave a lot of room left for rhinos and tigers and elephants and all of biodiversity.
Thank you, Eric. Oh my gosh, it's so great to hear this presentation. And we will continue the discussion, and I'm going to turn it over to Kristen right now. But again, thank you so much for coming on to talk to our folks. And I think that we need to establish, like you and I have talked, about a better relationship so that we can continue to look at how education can help us achieve our conservation goals and all the work that you guys are doing. So thank you again. And Kristen, do you want to take us to the end?
Sure will. Thank you, Judy. Just to quickly wrap up with some housekeeping items. If you're interested in the recording of today's webinar, either for your future reference or to share with your colleagues, you'll be able to find and share the webinar recording on EE Pro under the Learning tab. I will also be sending an email to anyone who registered for today's webinar, and the link and all of the resources that Eric mentioned in his presentation will be available in that email as well. I'm going to click to the next slide, Judy.
Yes, I was trying. I kept hitting it. Move.
No problem. Sometimes there's a bit of a lag here. Just as a quick reminder to mark your calendars for Thursday, September 28th at 4 p.m. Eastern. We will be joined by several representatives of the Center for Whole Communities who will be discussing using community engagement as transformative practice. It should be a great webinar, so we certainly hope to see you there. Also, a quick reminder that registration is now open for NAAEE's annual research symposium and conference to be held in San Juan, Puerto Rico, October 19th, beginning October 19th. We're so excited to have more than 1,000 educators join us for that conference. There will be all sorts of workshops, field trips, great sessions, and cannot forget our wonderful opening night speaker, Jane Goodall. We're so excited to have her, so we hope you'll join us there in San Juan. You can head over to NAAEE.org/conference to learn more and register. We would love to hear from you about what you'd like to learn in the future through our monthly webinar series, so please do let us know if you have ideas for future topics and presenters, and stay tuned to EE Pro for details on future webinars in the series. As I mentioned earlier, we do have some great webinars lined up to finish out the year, including an update on our EE Works initiative, which is our ongoing effort in partnership with Stanford University to demonstrate the impact of environmental education through empirical evidence, and to develop tools that practitioners can use to support their work. It's a huge undertaking and a lot of words, clearly, as I'm stumbling over them, but we know the results will hold a lot of value for the field as they become available. So we look forward to sharing our progress with you, and we hope to see you there. If you have 5 minutes to spare, we would love to have your feedback on today's webinar and the webinar series in general. Sky is pasting a link to that survey in the chat box presently. So if you have a quick minute to give us your feedback, we'd love to hear from you. We will also send this link in the follow-up email that you'll receive tomorrow afternoon if you don't have time to fill that quick survey out right now. We hope to see you at future webinars, and thank you again to Dr. Dinerstein and to all of you for taking the time to join us today, and we certainly look forward to seeing you in the future. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Eric. Fantastic.
Bye.